This is an extract from the Leader podcast by the Evening Standard. The whole thing is available on all major podcast providers. Still quieter than the London of last year, this was Piccadilly Circus 12 hours before Tier 2 restrictions hit the capital.
I find it a little bit silly because we can go to school and then there's 30 people in the classroom, everyone's from a different household, we're not all siblings there.
Localised where it's needed, but I can't see the point in locking down whole areas of the country. For example, in Devon there's hardly any incidents of it at all. So why should they suffer? Because other people in other parts of the country are not looking after themselves.
I'd rather it be we have a total lockdown for 2 weeks, 4 weeks or whatever. Like in Northern Ireland, the pubs are shutting today for 4 weeks and the schools are shutting for 2 weeks.
And that might still happen. It's clearly not the government's first choice. They want to give the tier system a chance, but it's certainly never been ruled out. And if the so-called circuit breaker does come, how quickly will it fall? How long will it last? And who will it affect the most? Our editorial column is thinking back to the first lockdown, when the schools closed, and warning that can't happen again.
One of the sharpest lessons from this spring is that children suffer disproportionately from lockdowns. The disadvantaged fall further behind in class. The most disadvantaged lose out on hot meals, vaccinations, and pastoral care. With children at home, the working lives of parents are disrupted. Schools can stay open under Tier 2 measures, but there is no guarantee that would continue under the circuit breaker that may follow. Neither is it clear that any circuit breaker would be short. The mistakes made in spring must not be repeated. The government should act now and make it clear schools will not be included in further lockdowns.
Our education editor Anna Davis is with me. Anna, parts of the country, including London, are going into Tier 2 in these new restrictions. We're all trying to work out what that means, but some people are trying to figure out what's next. Does anybody know?
Yes, that's a good question. I spoke to head teachers about this very thing and they are very frustrated because they don't know. They said they're working off rumours and newspaper headlines at the moment because no one's told them. The problem is some of them break up for half term tomorrow. Most of them are the following week, but a few of them do already have 2-week half terms that they'd planned anyway. They do every year and it gives people a bit of a break, especially after this last 6 months, which has been very tough for the teachers and the students. So they're slightly worried that if this 2-week half-term circuit breaker is announced, it'll happen at the end of their 2-week half-term and therefore their students will end up being off for 3 weeks and they won't have prepared anything for them. They won't have sent them home with any books or technology that they might need to continue their lessons. So there's worry about schools that are breaking up tomorrow. And then, I mean, even the schools that are breaking up the week after, it's leaving a bit late to not tell them what's happening.
And of course, they'll be thinking about way back in the spring when all this happened the first time and just the sheer amount of disruption that caused. Because those are the two lessons that we learned, aren't they? The organisation that you spoke about there, but also the harmful impact that an extended lockdown could have and did have on a lot of children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some schools are still seeing the impact of it on their students, you know, having been stuck at home for 6 months, you know, some of them in possibly unsafe conditions, seeing domestic violence and arguments between parents, all sorts of horrible things. And it definitely has had an effect on some of the children. You know, when they went back, teachers were saying that some of them were coming in like sort of shoulders hunched and eyes down, not sure who they were allowed to speak to because they were worried about the virus. Obviously, a lot of children were totally fine and very excited to get back to school. But those worries are really concerning. So, yes, the teachers want to make sure that if there is this extended break, they set things up right for them. They make sure that the charities that were helping certain families can still do that in this break and provide them with food or paper. Some of them get paper and books and things and tablets so that they can work on, or laptops. They want to do all that kind of stuff. I think if it's only a 2-week break, hopefully it won't be as bad because they're used to having the 1 week anyway. So it's not that much longer. And some schools do have 2 weeks anyway. But if it was to go on for any longer than 2 weeks, that would be really concerning.
Yeah, and there are some scientists, as reported in the Evening Standard today, who say that 2 weeks won't be long enough for a circuit breaker to work. And in the meantime, who's going to look after these children that aren't going to school?
Yeah, it's a nightmare, isn't it? I mean, that's why they just want to know. I think who's going to look after them? It'll be the parents who are trying to work from home, and we'll be back in that awful nightmare scenario of back in March when it all kicked off. And as we've said in today's paper, often it is the mums who end up doing the bulk of the childcare. They tend to be the set up as the primary carer just because it started off that way from the moment the child was born. They had maternity leave, and it's in times of crisis, you revert to the default, and the default is the mums looking after the kids and sacrificing their own work, which is another worry that we're going to see a whole generation of progress in women in the workplace going backwards because of this.
Yeah, I mean, 2020 is looking like the year when women had to put their career on hold, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Any lockdown of schools would be really harmful to women's careers. I suppose half terms, people are set up for that. So they, the balancing act of childcare is kind of in place, although it's been disrupted this year because I suppose you can't have the grandparents or those kind of options that you would normally have. But any longer than that, an extended lockdown would, cause it to come crashing down again, I think.